This is live from New Delhi. You're watching DT India News Hour, India's voice to the world. I'm Sakal Bhatt, and coming up in the next hour, India and Qatar elevate ties to a strategic partnership after talks between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Qatar's Amir Al Thani in Delhi. The US State Department says Washington and Moscow have decided to appoint teams to negotiate an end to the Ukraine conflict after talks in Riyadh. Israel to begin negotiations on the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal as Hamas confirms to release 6 more hostages this weekend. Sudan's RSF and affiliated groups meet in Kenya to form unity government after 200 killed in 3 days fighting. And in Pakistan to host its first major cricket tournament in 3 decades. ICC Champions Trophy 2025 kicks off on Wednesday. And we begin with the incoming visit of the Amir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, who is on a 2-day visit to India. The visit is aimed at strengthening growing partnership between the two nations. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Middle East outreach has marked a significant transformation in India's foreign policy, characterized by proactive engagement, strategic partnerships and diversified cooperation. And this is a big move in that step. Our next report by Jessica Taneja brings you more. Prime Minister Narendra Modi breaking protocol to personally receive the Amir of Qatar as he touched down in New Delhi for his state visit. The warm gesture by the Indian Prime Minister highlighted the growing ties between New Delhi and Doha. The high-profile visit of Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani highlights the strengthening ties between India and Qatar, two nations bound by history, trade and diplomacy. On the second day of his 2-day visit, the Amir of Qatar, Tamim, received the Guard of Honor and a ceremonial welcome in the forecourt of the Rashtrapati Bhavan on Tuesday. He was received by President Draupadi Murmu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi along with senior ministers from the government.
His Highness the Amir of Qatar is accompanied by a high-level delegation comprising ministers, senior officials and business leaders. The dignitaries who are accompanying His Highness include Qatar's Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, as well as the Ministers of Commerce and Industry, Energy, Electronics and Information Technology, Labour, and the Minister of State for Foreign Trade.
Prime Minister Modi held a bilateral meeting with the Emir at Hyderabad House in New Delhi. India and Qatar elevated their ties to strategic partnership as the two sides signed MOU, including on double tax avoidance and prevention of fiscal evasions with respect to taxes on income. With bilateral trade surpassing $14 billion in 2023-24, Qatar remains India's largest supplier of liquid natural gas, fueling the country's growing energy needs. In return, India exports a range of goods from food and textiles to engineering products. This visit is expected to pave the way for new agreements, deepening this economic partnership.
The partnership, which rests on the foundation of trust, trade, and tradition. We have a very strong historical legacy, starting right from the old times when we had the Silk Route. But today, we live in a new world, a new age, where we are rewriting the terms of trade. We are rewriting the way business will be conducted. In fact, we are creating new Silk Age routes, whether it's the IMEC, whether it's the newer technologies that we are engaged with.
Qatar's Minister of State for Foreign Trade Affairs, Dr. Ahmed bin Mohammed Al Saeed, highlighted the strong partnership between India and Qatar during Amir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani's visit. He emphasized collaboration in trade, technology, and investment, particularly in non-oil sectors, to strengthen bilateral ties.
The world today is changing dramatically in terms of trade and business, the apply of technology and AI. Qatar also enhancing the landscape of attractiveness of investment. We are welcoming Indian business people. We are encouraging our business society, government and public sector to invest more in India and to create more partnership.
But beyond trade, defense and security cooperation, the two nations share intelligence on counterterrorism, and India regularly participates in Qatar's maritime defense exhibitions. Recent agreements have bolstered cooperation in cybersecurity, port management, and skill development. Another key pillar of this relationship is the Indian diaspora. Over 800,000 Indians live and work in Qatar, contributing to its development. Their welfare remains a priority in bilateral talks. Jessica Taneja's report for DD India. Well, India's ties with West Asia have undergone a historic transformation under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership, and from economic partnerships to cultural diplomacy, India has reinvigorated its relationship with the region like never before. And the latest visit of Qatar's Amir is yet another testament to this deepening engagement or a relationship. Our next report tells you more.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi breaking protocol to personally receive the Emir of Qatar as he touched down in Delhi for a state visit. The warm gesture by the Indian Prime Minister highlighted the importance given by the country to the region and the growing ties between New Delhi and West Asia. Earlier in December, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also visited Kuwait, becoming the first Indian Prime Minister to visit the Gulf nation in over 40 years. Since 2014, several such steps have been taken by the Indian government to foster closer ties between the two regions. Over a decade, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has visited several countries in the Gulf region, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Iran, UAE, Jordan, and others, cementing historic ties between the two regions. For decades, West Asia has been central to India's strategic and economic interests, but under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, these ties have deepened like never before. Trade, energy security, infrastructure, and cultural diplomacy. India's outreach has been multifaceted. India's trade with Gulf region now stands at a staggering $160 to $180 billion annually, with over 9 million Indians living and working in these nations. The Gulf also acts as a gateway to the larger Middle East and North African and Mediterranean region, where India's trade is another $80 billion.
Prime Minister Modi has made great personal efforts for transforming India's relationship with all the countries of the Middle East region, and especially with the Gulf states. And this has happened steadily ever since he became Prime Minister of India in 2014. The relationships with all the Gulf countries were focused mainly on energy, trade, and the Indian expatriates. But now the relationship has evolved into a new framework encompassing political relations, investment, and defense and security cooperation.
A game changer in this partnership is the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, a massive infrastructure project connecting India to the Gulf and further to Europe. Announced on the sidelines of India's G20 presidency, the corridor is expected to revolutionize trade and connectivity.
Over the last decade, we've had a series of high-level visits between India and the Middle East countries, including the GCC. We've also seen a renewed focus from the GCC on India mainly because of the economic opportunities that India offers, and at the same time the interest that India has shown in reaching out to the GCC. I feel that going forward, the GCC and the Middle East countries will be interested in a new age economy in India, investing in that and making sure that they can tap into India's potential.
Beyond economics, PM Modi also strengthened cultural and people-to-people ties. On February 14, 2024, he inaugurated the first Hindu temple in the region, the Babs Temple in Abu Dhabi, symbolizing a new chapter in cultural harmony between India and the UAE. Diplomatically, India's engagement with the Gulf Cooperation Council has surged, with bilateral trade touching $161 billion in fiscal year 2023 and 2024. The region is now a major investment partner, especially Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which have pledged billions in infrastructure and energy projects in India. As both regions evolve, India's Middle East strategy under PM Modi has laid a strong foundation for enduring and mutually beneficial relations. With key partnerships strengthening, the future looks promising for India's engagement with the region. With deepening economic ties and strategic collaborations, India's presence in the Middle East is stronger than ever. The foundation laid today will shape a future of mutual prosperity and cooperation. From New Delhi, Akshay Dongre, DD India.
In other news, top US and Russia diplomats, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met in Saudi Arabia to resettle their ties and also start talks to end the conflict in Ukraine. The leaders agreed to appoint high-level teams to begin working on a path to end the conflict in Ukraine. Meeting also discussed conditions for meeting between US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Fuzel Ahmed of DD India reports.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held talks in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. Following the meet, the US State Department in a statement said that they've agreed to establish a consultation mechanism to address irritants to our bilateral relationship with the objective of taking steps necessary to normalize the operations of our respective diplomatic missions. Appoint respective high-level teams to begin working on a path to ending the conflict in Ukraine as soon as possible in a way that is enduring, sustainable, and acceptable to all sides, and lay the groundwork for future cooperation on matters of mutual geopolitical interest and historic economic and investment opportunities, which will emerge from a successful end to the conflict in Ukraine.
And as he said when he campaigned for president, and he wants it to end in a way that's fair, he wants it to end in a way that's sustainable and enduring, not that leads to another conflict in 2 to 3 years. That's not going to be easy to achieve, but he's the only one in the world that can begin that process. Donald Trump is the only leader in the world that could initiate that process, and today was the first step in that process.
While Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Russia and the United States agreed to establish a process of settling the Ukraine conflict and to remove barriers for diplomatic missions.
As for the Ukrainian issue, I mentioned the agreement that the Americans would appoint a representative and we would reciprocate. After that, the relevant consultations will begin.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin also said on Tuesday that Russian President Putin was ready to talk to Volodymyr Zelensky if necessary, but repeated its questioning of his legitimacy as Ukrainian president. Moscow also said that Ukraine had the sovereign right to join the European Union, but it was opposed to Kyiv joining NATO. Fuzel Ahmed's report for DD India.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Tuesday said that European nations would have to be involved in talks on ending the Ukraine war. This came after EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen stated that Europe wants to work with Washington for peace in Ukraine, while British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said there must be US security commitment for European countries to send post-war peacekeeping forces to Ukraine. Starmer also said that UK is ready to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine if needed. Fuzel gets us more.
The meeting between top US and Russian diplomats in Saudi Arabia triggered some concerns in Europe and Ukraine, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying that Kyiv was not invited to the discussions. Following talks in Riyadh, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said during an interview that European nations would have to be involved in talks on ending the Ukraine war.
But, and there are other parties that have sanctions. The European Union is going to have to be at the table at some point because they have sanctions as well that have been imposed.
Following European leaders' meeting, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer told reporters that there must be a US security commitment for European countries to send post-war peacekeeping forces to Ukraine.
Europe must play its role, and I'm prepared to consider committing British forces on the ground alongside others if there is a lasting peace agreement.
British Ministry of Defence also released a video showing Ukrainian recruits training at an undisclosed military facility in Britain. While US Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg, held talks with European leaders in Brussels, Kellogg met with President of European Council Antonio Costa and the President of European Commission Ursula von der Leyen. EU chief told Keith Kellogg that Europe wants to work with Washington for peace in Ukraine and is ready to do more to arm Kyiv. She wrote on X after meeting Kellogg in Brussels that financially and militarily, Europe has brought more to the table than anyone else, and we will step up. We want to partner with the US to deliver a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. Now is a critical moment. Meetings in Brussels took place after European leaders held an emergency meeting in Paris. On the other hand, Ukrainian President Zelensky was in Turkey.
In fact, the Istanbul negotiation constitute an important reference point as the platform where the parties came closest to an agreement, given the activity diplomacy we have pursued. In the last 3 years, our country would be an ideal host for future meeting between Russia, Ukraine and America.
Ukrainian President Zelensky commemorated Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder and first president of the Turkish Republic, on Tuesday. Fuzail Ahmed reports for DD India.
And still to come on DD India News Hour. Coming up next, we talk about what happens in the wake of Israel's withdrawal. The displaced Lebanese residents flocked to the border village of Yaron amidst a tense and uncertain situation. Tensions escalate in South China Sea as the Philippines accuses Chinese Navy helicopter of performing dangerous maneuvers over contested waters. And investigators probe Delta flight's crash at Toronto Pearson after it flips in windy, snowy conditions, injuring 18.
This week on Defence Dynamics, India navigates high-stakes global defence deals. Modi's France visit unlocks strategic technology, so what is it for India's fighter jets? Trump offers F-35 stealth fighters. Are they the game changer or geopolitical dilemma? The world leaders debate AI weapons. Can the regulations keep the lethal innovation in check? And India's Raksha Kavach, how it fortifies national security against modern threats. Catch it all this Wednesday at 8 PM IST only on DD India.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Sakal Bhatt, and now let's move on to some more news and updates. Israel has said that it will begin negotiations on the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal, but made it clear that Gaza will have to be completely demilitarized. On the other hand, Egypt postponed the Arab League meeting on Gaza to 4th of March, which was initially planned for next week. Meanwhile, on Tuesday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office confirmed that Hamas will hand over 4 hostage bodies on Thursday and release 6 hostages over the weekend. DD India's Raghav Kumar Jha has filed this report.
As the uncertainty looms large over the future of Gaza, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar said on Tuesday that Israel will begin negotiations on the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal. He demanded complete demilitarization of the area and said Israel is also committed to its goal to ensure the release of all hostages and meeting other objectives of the war. Sa'ar made it clear that Israel would not support any plan that would see civilian control of Gaza transferred from Hamas to the Palestinian Authority.
We decided to open negotiations on the second phase. It will happen this week. We demand complete demilitarization of Gaza. We will not accept the continued presence of Hamas or any other terrorist groups in Gaza.
Negotiations for the second phase of the deal were supposed to have started before the first phase ends on March 2nd, but Qatar said the talks have not officially started yet. Former Director General of Israel's Foreign Ministry, Alon Liel, said the Arab world and the rest of the international community are yet to present an alternative to the Israeli-backed US plan for Gaza. He said a plan from Arab leaders must clearly outline the roles of Palestinian and Arab countries as well as the rest of the world in the rebuilding and running of Gaza. Egypt announced on Tuesday that it has postponed an extraordinary Arab League meeting on Gaza on March 4th, which was initially planned for next week. The meeting has been called in response to US President Donald Trump's proposal to take over the war-battered Gaza Strip and displace its Palestinian inhabitants. Jordan's King Abdullah II reiterated his country's steadfast position against the displacement of Palestinians.
Unfortunately, what they don't understand or they can't understand. Let me reiterate our firm position: no to displacement in Gaza and the West Bank, and the reconstruction of Gaza without displacement. I stress the importance of working to reduce the escalation in the West Bank, and that a just and comprehensive peace based on the two-state solution is the only way to achieve stability in the region.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office confirmed that a deal with Hamas was reached in Cairo on Tuesday. Accordingly, Hamas will hand over 4 hostage bodies on Thursday and release 6 Israeli hostages over the weekend. Raghav Kumar Jha for DD India.
As Tuesday marks the latest deadline for a withdrawal of Israeli troops under the US-brokered ceasefire, Lebanon has said that it will consider any remaining Israeli presence on its lands an occupation and has the right to use any means to ensure an Israeli withdrawal. Under the November truce, Israeli troops were granted 60 days to withdraw from southern Lebanon, where they had waged a ground offensive against fighters from Lebanese armed group Hezbollah since early October. And that deadline was extended to February 18, but Israeli and Lebanese officials as well as foreign diplomats had anticipated that Israel would retain some troops on parts of the Lebanese side of the border. Meanwhile, after a long wait by the entrance of the southern Lebanese town of Far Kila, people started entering the border village on Tuesday after the withdrawal of the Israeli troops. People walked into the town chanting and cheering as Lebanese army soldiers watched over the small groups returning to their homes amongst destruction and rubble.
To turn to the UN Security Council, which approved Resolution 1701 to consider the continued Israeli presence in any inch of Lebanese territory as an occupation with all the legal consequences that result from that in accordance with international legitimacy. The attendees affirmed the Lebanese state's adherence to its full national rights and sovereignty over its entire territory, and also affirmed Lebanon's right to use any means to ensure the withdrawal of the Israeli enemy.
Well, tensions in the South China Sea continue, with the Philippines Coast Guard condemning dangerous maneuvers by Chinese Navy choppers on Tuesday. The Chinese chopper was flying within 3 meters of a surveillance flight carrying a group of journalists over the disputed territory of Scarborough Shoal. According to Coast Guard, the helicopter had been as close as 3 meters to the Fisheries Bureau aircraft, and this has not been taken well by the Philippines. Canadian investigators have begun searching for the cause of a Delta Airlines regional jet crash at Toronto Pearson Airport on Monday. The flight DL4819 from Minneapolis landed in windy conditions after a snowstorm, flipping over on the runway. The aircraft, which is a CRJ-900, had 80 people on board and 18 were injured, including 3 critically one of whom was a child. Emergency crews quickly responded to the situation with 15 passengers taken to hospitals. At least one of the plane wings were reportedly detached. Investigators are looking into whether gusting crosswinds and blowing snow played a role in the crash of the ill-fated plane. A new Sudan coalition, including political parties, armed groups, civil society leaders and the Rapid Support Forces, have begun a 4-day meeting in Nairobi. The aim of the meeting is to sign a founding charter on February 21st to establish a parallel peace and unity government. However, the talks come amid deadly violence. Attacks by the Rapid Support Forces have killed over 200 people in the past 3 days, delaying the signing. Emergency lawyers, meanwhile, report that the violence has ravaged villages near Al-Gitiana, highlighting the ongoing crisis in Sudan. Well, the veteran defence personnel from India have hailed Prime Minister Modi's visit to Mazargues War Cemetery during his recently concluded and highly successful visit to France. As a mark of supreme respect, Indian Prime Minister Modi paid homage to fallen Indian soldiers who martyred in the line of duty during World War I and II. At a solemn ceremony held at the site, Prime Minister Modi laid a wreath comprising the tricolour-themed flowers, a gesture that salutes the valour of sons of soil, the Indian war heroes. More than 4 million Indian troops fought for the British in the 2 world wars. Reportedly, although they served with distinction in almost every theatre, but their contribution remains contribution that India as a nation salutes. Lauding Prime Minister Modi's visit to French War Cemetery, former DG of the Defence Intelligence Agency, Lieutenant General KJS Dillon, called it the highest respect one can pay to fallen soldiers.
The cemetery at Masai is the 3rd largest in that country. A lot of Indian soldiers who fought during World War I and World War II, their names are etched in that cemetery. And as a tribute to the fallen soldiers, to lay a wreath or even to lay a small little rose is the highest respect you can pay for the soldier who went down fighting. As a soldier myself, I think it's the highest respect and tribute to the soldiers and their families. So I respect the gesture of laying a wreath at the stones of the soldiers, Indian soldiers, who fought in that theatre and laid down their lives.
Former Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain also emphasized that the gestures reflects Prime Minister Modi's deep respect for the history of the Indian Army.
Rifles was one of the first regiments to land in France during the First World War and fight the first few battles in 1914, the very famous battles of Festubert and Neuve-Chapelle. During a previous visit, the Honorable Prime Minister had also honored us by carrying a replica, a silver replica of the war memorial of the Garhwal Rifles and presented it to the mayor of the city there. This time too, he has chosen to go to Marseilles and honor all fallen heroes of the Indian Army there. It just shows the concern that the Honorable Prime Minister has for the history of the Indian Army, the history of valor of India and our fallen soldiers.
Meanwhile, former Western Army Commander Lieutenant General KJ Singh also praised Prime Minister Modi for taking time out of the very busy schedule to remember and honour India's brave hearts, setting out a strong message that India never forgets its fallen heroes.
It is indeed gratifying that our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, during his recent visit to France, took time out from his very busy schedule and visited the war cemetery and paid homage to the brave hearts of World War, the brave soldiers of India who had laid down their lives fighting in a distant land in very hostile conditions and with very bare essential facilities that were provided to them. So this act of remembering and paying homage to our brave hearts is indeed laudable.
Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar also called the visit a thoughtful tribute to Indian soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice.
In fact, it would astound you to know that in World War I, 60,000 soldiers died, Indian soldiers. And in World War II, the figure was 87,000. France honors the sacrifice regularly.
And still to come on DT India News Hour. Coming up next, we will be joined by former Indian envoy to Oman and subject expert on Middle East and India to talk about the significance of Qatar Amir Al Thani in Delhi.
This week on Defense Dynamics, India navigates high-stakes global defense deals. Modi's France visit unlocks strategic technology, so what is it for India's fighter jets? Trump offers F-35 stealth fighters. Are they the game changer or geopolitical dilemma? The world leaders debate AI weapons. Can the regulations keep the lethal innovation in check? And India's Raksha Kavach, how it fortifies national security against modern threats. Catch it all this Wednesday at 8 PM IST only on DD India.
Timeless, boundless and infinite. The essence of faith. The soul of Sanatan culture. From the sacred confluence of Prayag, where divinity descends to earth. Witness the grandeur, the devotion, the magic. World's largest cultural and spiritual gathering, with over 450 million devotees expected to attend. Mahakumbh, India's greatest festival of faith. Exclusively on DD India.
You're watching DT India News Hour. I'm Sakal Bhatt, and before we move on, let's do a quick recap of the top story. India and Qatar elevate ties to a strategic partnership after talks between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Qatar's Amir Al Thani in Delhi. The US State Department says Washington and Moscow have decided to appoint teams to negotiate an end to the Ukraine conflict after talks in Riyadh. Israel to begin negotiations on the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal as Hamas confirms to release 6 more hostages this weekend. Well, the Amir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, was hosted by President of India Draupadi Murmu on Tuesday evening at the Rashtrapati Bhavan in New Delhi. President Murmu wrote on X, that's the platform X, and I quote, "A warm welcome for a special friend." President Murmu also hosted a banquet in Amir's honor. The Vice President, Prime Minister and other dignitaries, including members of the high-level delegation from Qatar, attended the banquet. The Gulf constitutes the extended neighborhood of India, separated only by the Arabian Sea, and the Gulf countries, namely Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi and UAE, they all have emerged as a major trade and investment partners for India. The GCC countries collectively host around 9 million Indian nationals, and the cultural and people-to-people ties between India and the Gulf have historically been the bedrock of the bilateral relations. So, with the incoming visit of the Qatar's Amir, the ties are bound to get consolidated further. To talk about the significance of this visit and its impact on New Delhi and Doha ties, we are very glad to be joined by Ambassador J.S. Mukul. He's been the former Indian envoy to Oman, and extremely happy to have Subhomoy Bhattacharjee, senior economic journalist, on the show. Thank you very much, Subhomoy, sir. Such a pleasure having both of you. Ambassador, I would like to start with you. Give us an overview of the significance of the visit of Amir of Qatar, considering India's excellent relations, the trajectory we have seen post-2014 with all GCC countries.
Thank you. Absolutely, I think it's a very significant and important visit. It cements the journey that we have been that has been embarked upon, particularly by the Honorable Prime Minister, of forging at 2 or 3 levels. One, at the personal level, the contacts with the leadership of the 6 GCC countries and beyond, of course. At another level, to forge strategic relations with GCC countries and India. We already had strategic relations with a number of other GCC countries, and I'm very happy and I think it is absolutely appropriate that this visit has elevated the India-Qatar relationship to a strategic partnership. The Gulf region is not just our extended neighborhood, it's also our strategic neighborhood. And we are joined, we are not separated, I would say, but we are joined with the Gulf by the waters of the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. So in all manner of, from all aspects, this is an absolutely important visit, and I think it is reflected in the raising of formally raising the level to a strategic partnership. We had already seen strategic elements in this relationship. For example, last year, a long-term agreement had been reached for supply of 7.5 MMTs of LNG for a period of 20 years. So this is no longer a transactional relationship. It is not a relationship of convenience. It is built on the solid background of bedrock of historic trade relations, of people-to-people contacts, and of our bilateral relations in their multifaceted aspects. So yes, to sum up and by way of overview, I think it is a most seminal, I would even say a historic relation which has brought our bilateral relationship to a strategic partnership.
Subhomoy, taking a cue from this, how has India's relationship grown in a multifaceted way with the Middle East in general under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi? In a sense, we have gone beyond trade?
Well, certainly, Sakal. I mean, the big thing about India's relation with Middle East is that, as you were just discussing, that there is different ways in which we have looked at different countries. The key arm of our relationship with the Middle East is, of course, the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, Europe-Middle East, IMEC. Now, that is a breathtaking corridor in terms of the sweep of the ambition, in terms of what is being planned, and it has definitely caught the attention of the world as a very viable and a very powerful connecting stream from India's west coast going on to UAE, to Saudi Arabia, on to Israel and Europe. Now, you would notice, Sakal, that while it brings in several countries into that corridor, Qatar is one country which is actually not there. And while India's relationship with, say, UAE and Saudi Arabia have really gone ahead, in fact, with UAE, we are looking, as Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal had said, our investment of something over $100 billion very soon. Qatar has actually lagged. And so today's visit by the Amir of Qatar starts to bring that deficit into consideration to try to see what are the major issues. You'd see that the first thing that's happening is Qatar Investment Authority, which has got an investment of just about $1.5 billion in India, is now going to be majorly looking into Indian sectors where it can promote. Now, as you know, India is probably the best market for these countries to invest in. But while UAE and Saudi Arabia have taken the leap and have really moved ahead, Qatar is now getting into that. The strategic partnership that India and Qatar have signed, therefore, comes at the right time because it shows Qatar the opportunities that lie if they strengthen ties with India. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Ambassador Mukul, now since 2014, Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy doctrine, how do you see getting more proactive when it comes to the GCC or Middle East outreach, with a significant focus on the Middle East outreach, and to that, this visit of Amir, which comes close on the heels of Prime Minister's visit to Qatar last year? I think you were with us on the same show. We discussed it then as well.
Yeah. No, it's very clear that there has been a conscious effort to reach out to all the countries, not just of the GCC or the Gulf, but also the larger Middle East. And there, as I said, the Honorable Prime Minister has forged personal relationships with the leaders of many of these countries or most of these countries, and also in terms of the substance of the relationships. Just to come back and give the example, since we are the context is Qatar today, to give the example that while our bilateral trade is about 14 billion, a target of doubling it in the next 5 years has been fixed during this visit. As was already mentioned, with regard to investments, the total FDI from Qatar into India is about $15 billion, and now that is sought to be scaled up, and new sectors have been identified like renewable energy, smart cities, technology, startups, and in technology it's the cutting edge technologies of AI, robotics, and so on. So trade, investment, and then we of course come to energy, which has been the basic mainstay with regard to Qatar.
Yes.
Qatar, particularly the LNG imports. Qatar provides 48% of India's imports of LNG. Now that is a huge quantity given the size, the geopolitical standing of India, but more importantly also the size of the Indian market. Now all those things, and I'd already pointed out, we have entered into a 20-year futuristic agreement which kicks off in 2028. So I think all these elements with regard to Qatar add up to a comprehensive partnership, which I think is epitomized by in the strategic partnership that we have forged today.
Okay. Shubhamal, if you could also just take us through the historic significance, the ties between the two nations, the Silk Route become, there is a context to it, the region historically, which has been important for India due to its energy, resources, trade routes, etc.
Certainly, and you'd notice that Qatar is in a position where it's something like the bridgehead to Central Asia also, because Qatar has very strong relationships with Iran and other Central Asian countries. Now, that is a very significant position that Qatar has. Also, the other interesting thing that Qatar has, as you pointed out, not just the Silk Route, Qatar has been a position, while when we talk about the Middle East and we are largely we largely talk about the role of Saudi Arabia, Qatar has always been willing to take a different position. And with relations with India, Qatar has basically been the country where there has been a fair amount of Indian presence without any disturbance. And that was something significant. Now, one major thing is that you would realize that today Qatar and UAE both compete for bilateral aviation rights in the Indian market, and it is a very significant exposure or other position for these airlines. which look at India on one side and the European market on one side. So India is in a very commanding position to be able to take advantage of both the historical ties as well as the potential that Qatar offers as a counterpoise to many other countries. It is once Qatar is there with India in the Middle East corridor, then what happens is that India has sort of established a very deep relationship with all of these countries, and that's a very significant impress, because there's no other major I should say global power right now which has got such a uniformly good relation with all the countries of that region. And that is saying a very big deal and a very strong endorsement of the diplomatic reach that India has made out to that region. Yes.
Okay, also coming to the important component, Ambassador Mukul, large Indian diaspora, the way it has seen this or contributed in this massive transformation in diplomatic, economic and strategic ties under Prime Minister Modi's leadership.
Yes, the Indian diaspora has been in the GCC for a long time, but actually in the last few years, and today you mentioned 9 million in the 6 GCC countries. In Qatar, I believe the figure is about 835,000 Indians. But it's not just the numbers, it is the fact that their contribution is valued, it is appreciated. The Indians are respected for their integrity and honesty, for their hard work, for the skills and the technical knowledge and skills that they bring to the table. And I think across the board in GCC countries, the sentiment is that the Indian community has been a major contributor in the progress of each of these countries, and Qatar is obviously no exception. I would go to the extent of saying that the Indian community is considered a factor of stability in all these countries. In fact, in Qatar, I believe the Indian diaspora accounts for almost 25 or 27% of the total population of the country. And I think that's saying a lot. And the fact that they are valued and their contribution has been recognized is, I think, something to be very proud of.
Okay, and the deepening ties with key Middle Eastern nations also in a way, Subhomoy, reflects India's recognition of the region's strategic importance, whatever is happening in the world right now, geopolitically speaking, and the mutual benefits, the robust partnership. How does Qatar view India in this scheme of things?
Well, what I would say that what's happened is Qatar, as I started by saying, has been a bit of a slow starter. Despite the strong presence of the Indian community, as the ambassador rightly pointed out, Qatar has been the biggest seller of gas, natural gas to India. It accounts for almost 50% of the gas that we buy. But beyond that, Qatar has not really been able or willing to really push the package in terms of exploring deeper ties. Which has been sought to be corrected, because for Qatar, the Qatar Investment Authority to open an office in India, to get deeply into the Indian markets is a phenomenal advantage. This is something that is actually very, very useful for both India and USA and for Qatar. As you know, India has actually in this budget given advantage to sovereign wealth funds that the favorable tax structures will continue. So for Qatar, that actually is an opportunity to build on and to give operational and to bring in lots of things. For instance, things like making UPI, India's United Payment Interface, in point of sales in Qatar. The acceptance of setting up more roles in the gift city. These are things which will actually make Qatar much more integrated with the Indian market, the financial markets, and lots of other advantages which is now starting to show. and will start to show for Qatar. And that I think is something that Qatar is very keen to maximize upon.
Final question, Ambassador Mukul and Subhomoy. Ambassador Mukul, you first. How do you see India's positioning as a blend of economic, strategic and cultural diplomacy? The way Prime Minister Modi has positioned India as a vital player in the Middle East politics, paving the way for a future where they look at shared stability and shared prosperity.
Yes, I think one important thing to note is that we have looked at our relationship with each of the countries in the Middle East on their own merits, what is sometimes known as de-hyphenation. We have not looked at any of these relationships through the prism of any other country. And that is one of the reasons that we have been able so successfully to navigate despite the fault lines between some of these countries in the Middle East and at one time even in the Gulf, that we have been able to navigate our relationship with each of them without really falling into the pitfalls that they are there already. So I think that has been quite a success of Indian diplomacy and our foreign policy and our diplomatic profile, that we have been able to have the best of relations. Just to give an example, when there was fissures within the GCC, we had the best of relations with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain on the one hand, and Qatar and others on the other hand. Similarly, with regard to the Palestine, the Middle East region, we have the best relations with Israel and also with the Palestinians and the Arabs in general. So this, I think, has been the biggest success which we have been able to convincingly project, that ours is a reasonable stand, ours is a logical stand, and we do not take sides in their disputes and
Correct.
their differences, but our relations stand on their own merits, of course, based on the mutual interest of both the parties.
Right. Subhomoy, very quickly, your take.
Yeah, Qatar is now realizing that the relationship with India cannot just be based on gas. Natural gas was a very major part of what India and Qatar deal with, but now India is diversified, and India will be importing a considerable amount of gas from USA and other countries, and Qatar now realizes that it can't just be one horse show, one pony trick. So basically, that is something very major. It was necessary, and it has actually helped Qatar to agree and to diversify, and it helps both India to sort of stabilize and create the energy security that it needs, not just on oil but also now on gas. But for Qatar also to realize that yes, the Indian market is something that they just can't stay out of.
Yes, they just can't stay away from. Thank you very much, gentlemen, Subhomoy Bhattacharjee and Ambassador Mukul. Thank you for joining, both of you. Thanks.
Thank you.
And now let's take a look at this one. Veteran defence personnel from India have hailed Prime Minister Modi's visit to Mazargues War Cemetery during his recently concluded France visit, and as a mark of supreme respect, Indian Prime Minister Modi paid homage to fallen Indian soldiers who martyred in the line of duty during World War I and II. At a solemn ceremony held at the site, Prime Minister Modi laid a wreath comprising the tricolour-themed flowers, a gesture that salutes the valour of sons of soil, the Indian war heroes. More than 4 million Indian troops reportedly fought for the British in the two world wars. Lauding Prime Minister Modi's visit to French War Cemetery, former Director General of the Defence Intelligence Agency, Lieutenant General KJS Dillon, called it the highest respect one can pay to fallen soldiers.
The cemetery at Masai is the third largest in that country. A lot of Indian soldiers who fought during World War I and World War II, their names are etched in that cemetery, and as a tribute to the fallen soldiers, to lay a wreath or even to lay a small little rose is the highest respect you can pay for the soldier who went down fighting. As a soldier myself, I think it's the highest respect and tribute to the soldiers and their families. So I respect the gesture of laying a wreath at the stones of the soldiers, Indian soldiers, who fought in that theatre and laid down their lives.
Also, former Lieutenant General Saeed Atta Hasnain emphasized that the gesture reflects Prime Minister Modi's deep respect for the history of the Indian Army.
The Garhwal Rifles was one of the first regiments to land in France during the First World War and fight the first few battles in 1914, the very famous battles of Festubert and Neuve-Chapelle. During a previous visit, the Honorable Prime Minister had also honored us by carrying a replica, a silver replica of the war memorial of the Garhwal Rifles and presented it to the mayor of the city there. This time too, he has chosen to go to Marseilles and honor all fallen heroes of the Indian Army there. It just shows the concern that the Honorable Prime Minister has for the history of the Indian Army, the history of valor of India and our fallen soldiers.
Former Air Marshal Sanjeev Kapoor highlighted the significance of honouring the over 40 lakh Indian troops who participated in the world wars.
1,000 Indian soldiers who have died during First World War and the Second World War have been given due respect, and Om Namo Shivaya is engraved in this French cemetery. The 40 lakhs Indian troops who have participated in this war have been acknowledged by the Allied after both the World Wars, and the India Gate at Delhi is also made after the First World War. That is the relevance of this visit by the Prime Minister to the cemetery.
Meanwhile, former Western Army Commander Lieutenant General K.J. Singh also praised Prime Minister Modi for taking out time out of his busy schedule to remember India's brave hearts, sending a very strong message that India never forgets its fallen heroes.
It is indeed gratifying that our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, during his recent visit to France, took time out from his very busy schedule and visited the war cemetery and paid homage to the brave hearts of World War, the brave soldiers of India who had laid down their lives fighting in a distant land in very hostile conditions and with very bare essential facilities that were provided to them. So this act of remembering and paying homage to our brave hearts is indeed laudable.
Also, Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar called the visit a thoughtful tribute to Indian soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice.
In fact, it would astound you to know that in World War I, 60,000 soldiers died, Indian soldiers. And in World War II, the figure was 87,000. France honors this sacrifice regularly.
You're watching DD India Newshour. Let's quickly shift to some sports news. Pakistan is all set to host its first major cricket tournament in nearly 3 decades as the ICC Champions Trophy 2025 kicks off on February 19th. The 9th edition will feature 8 of the best ODI teams competing for the title. Defending champion Pakistan will play host, while India's matches will be played in Dubai due to the hybrid model agreed by the ICC. New Zealand fast bowler Lockie Ferguson has been ruled out of the Champions Trophy because of the foot injury. Ferguson, who missed the recent tri-series and suffered a hamstring injury during the International League T20, experienced pain in his right foot while bowling in a warm-up match against Afghanistan in Karachi. All-rounder Kyle Jamieson has been called up as a Ferguson replacement. Jamieson hasn't played for New Zealand since February last year. Since then, he has spent 10 months on the sidelines recovering from a stress fracture in his back. That's all for this edition of DD India News Hour, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on DD India mobile app. This app is available on both Android and iOS platforms. The QR code is on your screen to download. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on TT India. I'm Sakal Bhatt, and from all of us here in Delhi, thanks for watching TT India News Hour.